If we look into Quran further, then it tells us that Deen has different dimensions. For example, the Quran talks about the women and the men guilty of adultery, flog each one of them with 100 strips, and let not tenderness for them deter you from what pertains to Allah's Deen. It's not saying law, but Deen. But meaning of Deen here is law. Therefore, Deen has one dimension in the Quran that relates with those commands Allah has provided. But at the same time, the same word Deen has been used with reference to social obligation. So the Quran says, have you seen the person who denies his Deen or day of judgment? By doing what? By not praying, by not fasting, by not giving zakah? No. It says that this is the person who is not feeding the hungry, which means Deen is not confined to law, but Deen covers that area. Then we find the Quran telling us that Deen stands for removal of exploitation and injustice from society. So it says, وَقَاتِلُهُمْ حَتَّى لَا تَكُونَ فِتْنَةٌ وَيَكُونَ الدِّينُ لِلَّهِ. That Deen becomes all for Allah, and fitna or fasad, disturbance and violence and lawlessness should be eliminated. Here again we find that Deen refers to removal of all kind of fitna. And then in Surah Yusuf, the Quran talks about authority, hukum, which is also used in the Quran by the word sulta. In Lukum lillah, hukum is only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ذَلِكَ دِينُ الْقَيِّمُ. This is the manifest Deen. This ayah particularly tells us that sovereignty, power, authority all belongs to only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As such, a person who runs a business cannot say, I'm an entrepreneur and therefore it's my effort, it's my money, it's my investment and I'm its owner. Similarly, a person who thinks that he knows about a discipline cannot say, it's my knowledge. Knowledge ultimately belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because His hukum, authority, transcends all areas we can conceive. Therefore, when we talk about Deen, it's not just a matter of ritual, ceremonies, various festivals, or even praying and making certain kind of activities we call religious. Look into Deen in this sense, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to make sure that our life is not divided in so-called secular and religious. So, with reference to Yawmul Jum'ah, and fortunately we are meeting on Jum'ah, the Quran says, believers, when the call for prayer is made on Friday, hasten to remembrance of Allah and give up all trading. That's better for you if you only knew. But when the prayer is ended, disperse in the land and seek Allah's bounty. وَابْتَغُوا مِنْ فَضْلِ اللَّهِ. By doing what? By increasing zikr. It's very important to understand. The ayah begins with, when you hear the call for prayer, rush toward zikr. فَاسْتَوْا إِلَىٰ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. This sa'i means that you leave everything and move towards that. So, the beginning says zikr of Allah is in masjid, but the same ayah when ends says don't leave Allah's zikr in masjid. Carry it with you to marketplace, to laboratory, to your business, to your parliament, to your home. And when you do that, then you have been able to understand the integration of Deen in life. So, if we look into the Quran, the concept of Deen becomes very much different than what we understand by the word mazhab. Islam rejects consequently the idea of reducing religion to ritual and ceremonies and it widens the concept of obedience from church and temple and masjid to the whole life. Therefore, the ayah in this context tells us that while you come for Jummah to charge your iman, don't think that it's enough, but this charging should be fully reflected when you are back in your professionalism. The whole concept is summarized in one single ayah of Al-Baqarah, which says, O you who are believers, udkhulu fi silmi kaffa, wala tattabi'u khutuwati shaitan. Therefore, the ayah says that those of you who are believers enter in Islam in totality and forget about all those aspects which attract you. This udkhulu fi silmi kaffa means that we cannot draw a line. Friday is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so I say, Allah, you are great. But Saturday and Sunday for rest and enjoyment, and Monday for trade and business, and Wednesday for making international contracts and connectivity. But in all that contracts and connectivity, no concern for what Allah wants. The ayah says very clearly, when you are making international transactions, when you are writing a textbook, when you are dealing with your family, then the concern has to be what please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If that is so, then we have understood the meaning of Deen, and then we have entered Islam in totality.